Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Mr. Sokowski. I teach AP Euro and AP World. For this video, I'm going to be doing a Quarter 2 review for AP European History. So in this PowerPoint that I'm going to have a link below, it's going to be a review for my course in AP European History from the Quarter 2. So I'm going to be covering things like the Industrial Revolution, the ideas of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and so forth in this video. Again, if you like the video, like and subscribe, and hopefully you find this helpful. Alright, so the first thing that you want to know about during the Industrial Revolution, the best way to create a contextualization of the Industrial Revolution, and you can kind of see that a lot with the actual questions you might even get, is the idea is that the Industrial Revolution happens, yes, but there's two major things that happen before the Industrial Revolution that really lead to the the Industrial Revolution coming forward. So that's agriculture, meaning food. There's new food production through the Atlantic slave trade, so there's a new food source coming into Europe, right? And then the idea is that equates to a population boom because now there's a sustainable supply of food. Now families can eat, people can live longer. Thus, those two things equal what you would say is the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution just doesn't pop out of nowhere. It's like a slow process, and it's because of the food. It becomes more sustainable, meaning there's more of it, and it's at a steadier pace. And then there's a population boom because of that steadier pace coming with food and new types of crops being introduced into the European diet. You have a boom of the Industrial Revolution. Now, there are new methods being created that led to this new cultivation and this new agricultural boom, which is also kind of referred to as the Second Agricultural Revolution. And that all stems with the Dutch, right? So the Dutch and the Netherlands had a problem. They had a finite amount of land, which wasn't a lot, and they had a big population. So unlike other countries, they had to create better and more advanced techniques to utilize the very little land that they had to maximize the amount of agriculture or food production. Now that just is basically a little finite amount of land in an area of the Dutch. Now when that's applied to a bigger country, when England comes around and uses those same processes of techniques of utilizing the land better to create more food, applied to a big country like England, that's when you see a huge food production boom and then a huge population boom when the British adapt the Dutch methods of agriculture to their country, and then that really helps the English out because then the English become the first industrialized nation in the world, and that gives them a tech advantage over any other country at that point because they have technology in the industry compared to anywhere else. But it all starts with the Dutch and their farming techniques. So that's how it's very, very important to realize that. So you get a question of something like the idea of like which country had the first agricultural boom or utilized the agricultural methods earlier on in the 1600s or something like that, or late 1600s, early 1700s. They're referring to the Dutch or the Netherlands. They're not referring to England per se, even though you kind of like get this concept here. You're like, God, it's going to be England. It's going to be the Industrial Revolution. The Dutch farming techniques were taken by the English and applied to England, and that's what really is one of the first of two steps leading to the Industrial Revolution. They did crop rotation, which basically utilizes the idea of constantly changing the crops up, so that gives a break for the soil. You put another plant in or a different type of crop into the soil that you grew there. That way you're always maintaining a level of nitrogen, the idea of like vitamins into the soil so it can continue to produce food at a steady level. They do other things too, like the ideas of like manure and so forth to give nutrients back into the soil, so they're getting a big boom. Another big change was the idea of the crops that were basically brought into the New World. To the Old World from the New World. The Old World is Europe, the New World is Americas. One of the most famous things are potatoes. The potatoes that were found in the New World are brought into Europe, but now they're not just brought into Europe, now they're going to be grown in Europe by Europeans in European soil. Why is that important? It becomes a staple food of the European diet. It can sustain harsh weather, colder weather. It doesn't have to be in perfect climates. The soil doesn't have to be perfect. It can be rocky soil, hard soil, and it'll still grow. And it grows underground. It's a tubular type of vegetable. So that's really important because it's more sustainable. Like animals or bugs or whatever won't come by and eat it if it's on the top of the soil growing like that. So it becomes, and it's also a carbohydrate, which means it's a really good part of a steady diet for people that might not know where their next meal is coming from. So it's something that lasts in their body longer. So it becomes a staple food of the European diet, which leads to longer life, more sustainable meals, and it continues on. So it's really important going forward. Another method that the English utilize is this thing called the Enclosure Method. So the way that you'll be asked the Enclosure Method for the Agricultural Revolution, and basically that's consolidating land plots into one land plot to grow one type of vegetable or food. So you had all these little farmers all over. England's the first to use its government to say, hey guys, everyone off the land, we're just going to grow one crop together. I'm going to kind of pile up all your farmland into one area. I'm going to enclose it, Enclosure Method. I'm going to enclose it, and I'm going to utilize and grow only one vegetable there. And it's going to be exponentially more efficient because there's not all these little different areas growing different things and little roads and stuff. You consolidate the land into making one type of product, and that's what's utilizing today. You see in farming and plantations and stuff. You don't see anytime you go anywhere, there's usually like a strawberry picking or something. You just see like just strawberries, just rows and rows of it because they're making a lot of it by utilizing just one type of product. So enclosure and consolidation is the farming technique that they would be looking for. That they would give you a question of like what was one of the processes of England's agricultural boom, and it would be something like the Enclosure Method. Now I don't know how they phrase it, but basically it's one of those things you need to know for the Industrial Revolution. The other thing that you want to know really well is that the first industry that was basically transformed forever by the Industrial Revolution once it was going was the cotton industry, the textile industry. Shirts, cloth making was the first industry that got revolutionized by actual machines doing the processes that people were once doing before. Now remember, if you like the video, like, subscribe. Jazz hands. It was originally called the putting out system, which was the cottage industry, and that changed when the Industrial Revolution came around. The cottage industry was basically like it was in family homes that the actual textile material was basically being cultivated or utilized. Then they started to apply it to bigger sheds. The sheds were next to water sources at first, so that's where they were getting the actual energy to produce the actual textiles. Then once coal was introduced into the Industrial Revolution, it became the engine, which basically was able to work anywhere. Like you can make a factory anywhere. You don't have to be next to a water source. And they were the first ones that started to grab the people, started to change the cottage industry from being in people's homes to these long shed-like features, like a factory that you would think of, and to produce it at an exponential level. And this changed life forever because now people are no longer working from home. They're going to a factory, they're going out to a job, and that kind of whole life and the whole world changes from that. But it's the textile industry is one of those ones that they would ask you which one was revolutionized first. Now, during this age of the triangular trade network, this new thing called mercantilism is basically increased or is still being utilized prior to like really the Industrial Revolution comes in, and the Enlightenment with Adam Smith really changes. It gets adapted into the world economic system, but mercantilism is the economic system prior to capitalism, and then later on communism coming into the ideas of economic motives or economic means of the world. Okay, again, mercantilism is like Scrooge McDuck. I like to say to my students is that each country thinks that to be a strong country, you must have a lot of gold coins in your piggy bank. Scrooge McDuck was notorious of having all these gold coins in a big tower of a bank kind of thing. He would go swimming in it. So that's how they relate power. So friends would say, hey, I got to get more gold in my coffers, my piggy bank, and that way I know I'm doing a good thing here, or I'm in the positive. Now that's not the way the world economic system works today. But back then, that was basically the thought of power and wealth. Now, instructions for use. Basically, to strengthen the power over its territory and its neighbors, England created something called the Navigational Acts. This was basically established first by lawmakers of Charles II, and basically, the Navigational Acts puts England to become an economic powerhouse over the Dutch. The first ones that are really the economic powerhouse and the land powerhouse are the Dutch. They have the land agricultural methods, and then they have the first Dutch East India Company. Financially speaking, they are very well off. England takes advantage and utilizes what the agricultural productions methods that the Dutch are using, and then England kind of like stands out as like a little next door neighbor by including these things called the Navigational Acts, creating a monopoly on trade with the British colonies. This is basically also what leads to the American Revolution down the line. It's because the colonists in the Americas at the time, well, now they're in the Americas now, but at the time they were the colonies, they had to pay and only a tax and only use the ships of the British because they were the colonies from the British. That created a monopoly for the British, and they were able to charge and increase taxation without representation, on the colonists, and that was the only way that they were getting any food or resources, so they had to kind of like oblige by it. But what it does is it makes England become a super powerhouse because they're saying, "Look, colonies, you can only trade with us. You don't talk to the Dutch," kind of thing. Now, rivals of the British were the French. The French were the next big major rivals of the British coming up and during this time. The British and French were locked in a series of wars. These three series of wars basically kind of like brings a certain level of competitiveness to the European landscape, because up until this time you had Spain, Italy's not formed. You have Russia, which is a powerhouse, but it's still very agriculturally backwards in the sense that it's not keeping up with the times, with the industry and the new cultivation of land and the new techniques going on with the Europe. You have England as a powerhouse now. You have the Netherlands and so forth. Germany's not formed yet. Now France is like the next one to kind of like step up and kind of say, hey, what about me? So the first round of war that basically kind of like equaled the playing field for France was a war of Spanish succession. In this, the French king Louis XIV had accepted the Spanish crown from his grandson. This succession was bad news for Britain on two parts. When your rival or enemy gets land or more power, that's not good for you, right? Let me go back, sorry. The War of Spanish Succession in 1701 was bad for Britain because it upset the balance of mainland Europe. Now France has an upper hand against the British. And it also meant France and Spain now threatened to encircle and destroy the British colonies in North America. Now it's like kind of Spain and France are like tag teaming and like wrestling move the English colonies, and that's not good for England. Louis XIV and his own issues, defeated by a coalition of states. Basically, he was forced to sign the Peace of Utrecht to secede his North American holdings in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and the Hudson Bay Territory to Britain. So when Louis was basically having his own meltdown, the British kind of took advantage, and it led to this thing called the Peace of Utrecht, where you start seeing the land in the colonies actually going towards the British, and basically the British are progressing with their power at this time. The Peace of Utrecht is like one of those ones that you want to know and just get the gist of it for the ideas of what's happening at the time with the landscape and the balancing of power in Europe. And it's one of those ones that you need to know. There's a review sheet that I'm going to give you guys that has the most important treaties on it, and I'll put that up here, and I'll do a video of it. And it's basically goes into every major concept, every major name, like the most major names possible, on like 8 pages of just like notes, like a quick little outline. And then on the bottom I have like the major treaties that you need to know that could pop up in any which way. The second round of war was basically the War of Austrian Succession, which basically was when Frederick the Great of Prussia seized Silesia from Austria's Maria Theresa. This act was basically known, what basically pulled the world into war. This included Anglo-French conflicts in India and North America. So it's like now this is like territorial battles, and now they're starting to step on each other's toes in the new world, because that's basically the things that they're really trying to put their stranglehold on to get the most economic benefits for these countries. Remember, mercantilism. They're all really trying to get the gold coffers filled, and now they're really just like getting in each other's way, kind of like stepping on each other. The third was the Seven Years' War from 1756 to 1763. This is another famous one, especially in U.S. history. France and Austria tried to win back Silesia from the Prussians. The Prussians formed an alliance with England. In America, French and British settlers start to fight, and this drew Native American allies into all sides of the conflict. So this is like literally the colonists in the New World, the French and English colonists, along with the Native Americans, are now getting into a fight on their own called the 7 Years' War. And this is important because this is one of those things that like it's important for American history, and it's especially important for European history, not because of the war itself. It's from the aftermath of the war. Is because these wars are very expensive, draining the coffers of this mercantilist economic system. These wars, and especially for in France's point of view too, of the French Revolution, and sorry, the American Revolution, by where the French support the American Revolution, meaning they support the colonists to break away from their mortal enemy, the British, and the 7 Years' War really just drained France's coffers. They had no money by supporting these costly wars. And this ends up becoming one of the focal pieces of their issues with taxation and the Estates General and the French Revolution, because they got involved in these costly wars and now they have to pay up. And this is one of the biggest stepping stones that leads to the French Revolution. So it's very interesting to see, is because the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution both drain the finances of France, leading to the French Revolution. Now, it's one of the factors of the French Revolution, but it's still very interesting to see that they got involved in this war, and now they got to pay for it, and now they have their issues with their own people, and that causes their own French Revolution. Britain's victories on all fronts, ratified with the Treaty of Paris, and this basically marked Britain as a global power during this time. So these three series of wars basically put Britain onto the next level, like of European dominance, and basically it's a whole grab of power for all these countries. This is where I'm going to be leaving it off. I'm going to be talking about next the American Revolution and then the French Revolution, and then you can see how they're tied into the ideas of the Enlightenment. Again, a review: Industrial Revolution, contextualization would be the agricultural revolution with the population boom led to the Industrial Revolution. So if you get a DBQ, LEQ, whatever, on the Industrial Revolution in Euro, which maybe not, it's more of like a world history thing, but if you get that as a LEQ concept, you can use contextualization as food plus people equals industry. If you get the American Revolution and you get, or the French Revolution, a good contextualization for that would be the Enlightenment, and also the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution led to the French Revolution. So if I had a French Revolution LEQ DBQ, I could easily just go into the ideas of the Enlightenment, the ideas of France getting involved in costly wars, the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, right? And how those became the contextualization or the background leading into the French Revolution. So that's why it's really good to kind of see the history going through quarters like this. I'm going to do a good review at the end with everybody, but it's not going to be chronological. You're not going to see a lot of like that flow that you can really just grab a piece of it and be able to write, especially. Okay? Well, hopefully you like this video. Like and subscribe. Jazz hands, and I will see you guys later. Have a great day.